Well, look who's back in the rerun lineup. The dance queen Nilou herself returns in 3.6 first half, gracing us with her presence, fully knowing that many things have changed since her first introduction in 3.1. With many crucial Dendro units released since her introduction, Nilou-oriented team comps have become an incredibly strong staple in the Bloom industry, surprising any and all who have the glory of witnessing her destroy absolutely everything, including your own team if you aren't careful. YouTube frogs, welcome to an updated 3.6 Nilou guide covering the most essential information you'll need to force your enemies to touch a bunch of grass. We'll be covering her talents, unique mechanics, optimal weapons and artifacts, constellations, and team comps alongside a gameplay showcase. Let's begin. From Constellation 0 to Constellation 6, the core of Nilou's kit centers around her ability to change how the base bloom reaction works. Usually, Hydro and Dendro produces a Dendro core on the ground, which then activates on Pyro or Electro application to produce Burgeon or Hyper Bloom. But when no additional element is applied, this Dendro core eventually explodes on its own, dealing AoE Dendro damage. With Nilou's kit, the Dendro core itself becomes enhanced, exploding nearly instantly and dealing massively increased damage corresponding to Nilou's HP and the EM of the character triggering the Bloom core. On initial release, our Dendro characters were extremely limited. We only had DMC and Kali to use. But now, with the addition of the Dendro Archon, Nahida, Alhaitham, and Yao Yao, Nilou-oriented comps are insanely strong, absolutely obliterating waves of enemies with little to no effort. The focus of her kit centers around her Elemental skill and Ascension 1 passive. The combination of both grants the Super Bloom effect you may have seen, increasing Dendro core size, AoE size, and massively decreasing explosion time. In tandem with her E and A1 passive, her A4 passive is responsible for enhanced bloom damage that scales off of her HP. Elemental Burst is responsible for 2 additional sources of AoE Hydro application and extra damage. And then her normal charge attack doesn't matter at all. If you plan to use her elemental skills on field DPS, they have a separate multiplier within her elemental skill. Let's dive into some necessary details. Elemental skill. So this is technically Nilou's highest priority talent investment, but not really, which we'll get into. There are 2 sides to her E. There's an Aura stance, and then there's a Sword stance. Both are activated by pressing E and then doing 3 actions afterwards. In order to activate Aura stance, the last action must be your E. If you want to do Sword stance, the last action must be your left click. The 2 middle actions after the first E and before the last action can be whatever you want. Normal tech or E, it does not affect the stance. In general, 95% of you will be using Aura stance, which is the off-field, no damage, Hydro application effect, used strictly to activate her Ascension 1 passive and initiate the Super Blooms. 5% of you will use Sword Stance, the on-field damage dealing effect, which can also be used in Super Bloom, but is more often for DPS Nilou in non-Bloom comps. In general, most of you will only care about Aura Stance. You spam your E until your Aura is up and then continue the rest of your team's rotation. Therefore, the multipliers on this ability aren't really too valuable. And the energy generation is not really a priority, with the duration cooldown at a pretty standard 12-second uptime and 18-second downtime for the Aura Stance. You might think, wow, if none of this actually matters, then why is she so powerful? To answer that, let's go to her passives. So the beauty of Nilou's character design is that her talent levels by themselves actually don't matter. For nearly full value of her explosive kit, you can leave all her talents at level 1. Why? Her Ascension 1 passive introduces this Super Bloom mechanic, otherwise known as Golden Chalice's Bounty. As long as there are only Hydro and Dendro characters in her team, this effect will take place. To activate, complete the last action of her E, it doesn't matter which stance. The effect, plus 100 team elemental mastery for 10 seconds, Dendro cores have increased size, increased AoE, and a near instant explosion mechanic. Combine this with her Ascension 4 passive. Every 1000 HP above 30k increases the Super Bloom core damage by 9% up to 400%. So 31,000 HP is 9%, 50,000 is 180%, and 74,000 is around 400% for the cap. Notice that these 2 passives together provide easy activation, insane damage, and high consistency with the decreased explosion rate. None of this relies on her talent levels. The reality is, while the detail of her kit is decently complicated, you don't need to worry too much about it. You spam your elemental skill, or E normal attack times 2 into E to save 0.3 seconds, activate Ascension 1 passive, unload your entire team's abilities, and watch the grassworks happen. So, what's the purpose of her elemental burst then? AoE Hydro damage, 2 sources of it, and 2 sources of Hydro application. The multipliers are actually impressively strong, and it procs twice. The second one happens 2.5 seconds after the first. This 2.5 second interval allows 2 separate sources of AoE Hydro application to occur from one activation of her burst, useful as a damage nuke and or to continue the Super Bloom's mid-rotation. Normal charge attack, don't concern yourself with her raw normal charge. These multipliers are for her uninfused version, which are attack scaling. If you plan on doing on-field Nilou, Sword Stance has 3 unique multipliers here, located at elemental skill. Sword Dance, and Luminous Illusion. So, talent investment, elemental skill over elemental burst with the normal charge attack being useless. But, as we went over, you don't really need any of them, so feel free to leave them all at level 1. At Constellation 6, normal charge attack is still useless, but I would consider elemental skill equal to the elemental burst because she deals considerable damage at this stage with both her sword stance and her burst. Weapons. So when building up Nilou, there's not really that many weapons that truly support her kit design. For Aura Stance, she really only cares about HP for her A4 passive, Elemental Mastery for A1 passive, optional, and maybe some energy recharge for her burst, which is also entirely optional. For Sword Stance, she either follows the same build path as Aura Stance, or you can invest in her as a DPS following an HP scaling Hydro DPS. If you are planning to run a standard Nilou build, her signature Key of Kajna suit is going to be best value. In fact, it's the only weapon that has any real value for her, since it has supportive utility that grants Team Elemental Mastery corresponding to her own HP, and also grants her a crap ton of HP percent. All other weapons in the game do not come close to this value, so even if I mention other options, they are just quote usable and not great. The only other weapon that provides utility value that is meaningful for Bloom comps is Xiphos Moonlight. I would only suggest using this at high refinement though, and to still prioritize HP percent first before any elemental mastery from the passive. Otherwise, for standard Nilou builds, for HP we have Jade Cutter, for energy recharge we have Favonius or Sacrificial Sword, for elemental mastery, any EM sword works. There's like 4 or 5 of them. We have Freedom Sword as 1, Xiphos is 1, Iron Sting is 1, Alley Flash is 1, and I think Sapwood grants a little bit of elemental mastery here. For non-Bloom Nilou, which includes DPS, Vaporize or any other DPS build, Lo-Fi, RN, Mistsplitter, and Jade Cutter are all crit weapons that are suitable. Festering Desire is the only 4-star worth considering for DPS, and it's actually pretty good. The passive fully utilizes for her sword stance because all of that is elemental skill damage, and she also has energy recharge for burst uptime. Now, for artifacts and stat priority. For standard Bloom Nilou, she only cares about her own HP and then transfer elemental mastery or energy recharge to her teammates. With the introduction of new 3.6 artifacts, it is now possible to run Nilou on a pure plus 40% HP 2-piece combo, combining 2-piece Tenacity and the new 2-piece Vorukasha's Glow set, which is now her best personal set to run. For a build prioritizing her own EM, 4-piece Gilded Dreams or any 2-piece combo of plus 80 EM will do the trick. Because of her team restrictions, getting pure EM from Gilded Dreams may not be possible, so the alternative of 2-piece plus 160 is very close in strength. And then for DPS Nilou, the new 4-piece Glow set providing HP, skill damage, and burst damage provides the best all-around stats for maximizing her multipliers damage. Because the new Glow set stacks on damage taken, it's still best used in a Bloom-oriented comp as the self-Bloom damage counts towards stacks and also the best in slot choice for C6 Nilou. And of course, the default fallback is what you see on screen here. 2-piece Tenacity and 2-piece Heart of Death for standard HP and Hydro damage. Since the 2-piece plus 40% combo is one of her best universal sets, previous 2-piece options like Emblem and Noblesse are no longer recommended. Main stat choices. I'm broken this down into 3 different categories. Standard Bloom Nilou, capping her HP, non-Bloom Nilou, where she becomes a standard Hydro DPS, and C6 Nilou, where she gains crit based on her HP. Standard Bloom Nilou, triple HP, standard build. Easily allows her to reach 74k HP cap. Substat priority, energy recharge for burst, equal to EM, doesn't really matter, depends on your build. C0 to C5 DPS Nilou. HP Timepiece, Hydro Goblet, and a crit rate or crit damage. Pretty standard HP scaling DPS. C6 Nilou, where she gains 30 crit and 60 crit damage based on her HP, which we'll get to in Constellations. Mixed Bloom/DPS build. This is just a triple HP where you can offer crit damage on the mask. HP Hydro crit damage is hyper DPS focused, and then HP Hydro HP is an optimized DPS with the Key of Kajna suit build, which is her signature weapon. So in my opinion, her build path is quite budget friendly and flexible, requiring basically only one stat to be very useful, which is HP. All other stats are bonuses that allow her to shine beyond what she's designed for. Alright, baseline build with weapons and artifacts is complete, so here's my recommendation of stat thresholds. Minimum requirement, level 90 Nilou. This brings her base HP to just over 15,000, which then allows double Hydro Resonance of plus 25% HP to grant 3.8k HP. Now why is this important? Because Nilou's 74k HP hard cap for her Ascension 4 passive includes this resonance, so her base build needs 3.8k less HP. So for maximum efficiency, your Nilou should not go above 70,000 HP. In general, a good range is anywhere between 60 to 70k, which is 64 to 74k with Hydro Resonance, which will then provide 300 to 400% of the bloom damage increase from her A4. All of the other stats are optional, so I won't be providing a recommendation, with Elemental Mastery and Energy Recharge being the important ones to consider. Now, do not use my Nilou stats as a template. These are optimized around an R5 key and Constellation 6 to provide both maximum HP for bloom damage and insane personal damage, converting her HP into crit rate and crit damage. Constellations. Nilou is one of the few characters whose design value is near full power at Constellation 0. In fact, most of her constellations aim to improve her personal hydro damage, which most of you won't ever really care about. If you want maximum value from her super blooms, her Constellation 2 and Nahida's Constellation 2 are the only direct improvements. Personally, I wanted to C6 her purely off of design. Constellation 1. Sword Stance third hit, which is the Luminous Illusion, deals 65% more damage, and her Aura Stance duration increases from 12 seconds to 18 seconds. While both of these are nice to have, they are not essential for her core gameplay. Stance duration seems important on paper, but with a full Hydrodendro team committed to blooms, the Aura duration increase here is not noticeable in most situations. C2. Only within the Super Bloom comp, Hydro damage decreases enemy Hydro Res by 35%, and Bloom damage decreases enemy Dendro Res by 35%. This is the only constellation that directly benefits her Super Bloom damage, and it also stacks with 4-piece Deepwood. C3, C5, plus 3 levels. Constellation 4, burst uptime improvement with the flat energy return of 15, and the damage increase by 50%. Nothing too crazy, but noticeable if you end up having C6, which provides additional conversion of her total max HP to crit rate and crit damage. 50,000 max HP hits the cap of plus 30 crit rate and plus 60 crit damage. This constellation retroactively improves the strength of her C1, C2, and Constellation 4 by providing substantial value to her own personal damage, which means it increases the value gain from C1's 65% third hit, from C2's Hydro Res Shred on Hydro damage, and C4 on burst damage increase. So overall, Nilou's constellations beyond C0 are purely for fun. While C2 is a direct increase to her kit's DPS, the strength of her bloom kit is already staggeringly high, so there's no incentive to go beyond C0 if you're just interested in meta usage. Team comps. So, one of the key points about Nilou's design is that her A1 passive poses a composition restriction. In order to access her super blooms, her team can only contain Dendro and Hydro units and must contain at least one of each. When she was first released back in 3.1, her teammate choices were fairly limited. Only DMC and Kale existed at that time, creating her first composition that is still strong today. Nilou plus DMC plus Kale plus Kokomi or Barbara. Double Hydro plus double Dendro synergy is the classic layout for most of her team compositions, with a healer being necessary due to the amount of self-bloom damage you take. It is not possible to ignore a healer position from here, unless your on-field character can fully tank all self-bloom damage. And very importantly, to keep of note, because her strongest team comps involve this restriction, her optimal field of play is against large groups of enemies who enable much more bloom generation than single target. Solo enemies for single target damage will inevitably reduce core generation due to internal cooldown, which lowers her overall bloom consistency. This, however, is not a long-term issue, as she still deals so much damage that she even clears single target bosses without much difficulty. Rotation-wise, I typically start with Nilou's full E combo before applying any Dendro in order to start generating her super blooms from the first reaction. If you apply some Dendro first, the initial cores before her Ascension 1 activates will be those normal, slow detonating cores that take up the core limit and reduce her total bloom generation. After that, the rotation can be improvised pretty heavily depending on your team layout, enemy positions, and what abilities you have available, so don't feel forced to perfect a rotation every time. From here, we can build her strongest team layouts by including Dendro units released after her inception. The Dendro Arca Nahida and the adorable Yao Yao and Yuagui. Still maintaining double Hydro with Nilou plus Nahida plus Yao plus Hydro Flex, this team comp capitalizes on Nahida's E control and EM transfer from her burst alongside her passive, alongside Yao's high Dendro application, healing, and tank capabilities. Yao's burst providing her with 50% Dendro resistance and extremely potent AoE healing make her the perfect puzzle piece to make Nilou's kit shine. This leaves the Hydro Flex slot to be a little bit more aggressive than Kokomi because Yao is the solo healer in this, typically opting for Xingqiu or Yelan for their intense Hydro application on your target of choice. In my demonstration, I do have C2 plus Nilou and C2 plus Nahida, so sometimes the blooms do crit, dealing 70 to 80,000 damage. This is obviously not normal, but you can still expect anywhere between 20 to 40,000 blooms easily with C0 on everyone. And a more uncommon variation of this team comp can utilize Candace in the Hydro Flex position. With her Hydro Infusion, this turns on-field Yao into a solo bloom generating machine, with Dendro application coming from Yuagui and her normal attacks applying Hydro. And then we have other variations of the standard Nilou team comp. You can also run triple Hydro, solo Dendro. Usually this would contain an on-field Dendro character like Nahida, Yao, or Alhaitham and 2 additional Hydro units, most commonly Xingqiu, Yelan, Kokomi, 2 of those 3. Bloom generation on this team will be mixed between your Hydro units and your on-field Dendro due to the overwhelming Hydro application and then the occasional burst of Dendro application from your on-field abilities. Lastly, for my C6 Nilou users or ambitious C0 to C5, we have Vaporized Nilou. Comprising of Bennett, Kazuha, and Xiangling, this all too familiar team composition focuses on massive pyro application so that Nilou can run her sword stance here and deal deliciously powerful vaporized damage with her burst alongside her normal attacks. Obviously less consistent than running her standard bloom orientation, but it's fun nonetheless. And that concludes an updated full guide for Nilou for patch 3.6. One of the most unique designs, forcing a particular playstyle, but producing an extravagant amount of damage while looking absolutely beautiful. Whether you're a fan of smothering your enemies in grass or vaporizing them to ashes, Nilou has got you covered from C0 to C6. I'm wishing that all Nilou Wanderers become Nilou Havers this rerun. Thanks as always for watching. Let me know what you think of her in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Take care.